Hello and welcome back. Yeah, I'm finally back from my summer hiatus. Thanks to everyone for being patient. These small vacations from YouTube are needed to keep from getting burned out and more importantly to keep my family from disowning me. What you see before you today is the Mighty Maverick. Originally it was going to be called the Mad Maverick, but was changed due to the name already being in use. It came out in 1970 and the 1971 toy lines, and then showed up again in 1975 without the wing in the back and with the hood permanently closed. It also was painted in enamel at that time, so the Spectraflame versions are much more sought after. This particular Maverick is in what I would call decent shape, as in it has all of its parts except the removable plastic wing in the back. It's heavily pitted and oxidized in the body, however the base is in rather good shape. The rear axle and wheels have an issue in that they're completely loose. You could probably tell that the car's back end was lower than it should be. Let's go ahead and take this one apart and see how it looks on the inside. After drilling out the post, I can disassemble the car. And getting a good look at the base, you can see that Mattel went with the plastic pre-built suspension on this model. You can see here that the rear axle assembly has broken loose of the plastic. This style of suspension will become very popular in the late 70s, 80s, and some of the early 90s. Mattel could build the suspensions and then drop them into several different models, making production easier. This is due to the fact that most cars made at this time were made of metal. Later, when Mattel began using plastic bases, this production method fell out of favor, and Mattel began to just attach the assemblies to the bases. The windshield and interior plastic are in good shape, and the hood is luckily not broken. Getting a good look at the engine, however, you can see some injection molding issues, or places that did not receive metal when the body was cast. These are of course covered up by the hood, so not that big of a deal. After removing the paint, you can get a good idea of how much oxidation this car has, and it's pretty bad. In my experiences restoring cars, I've found that cars painted in yellow or gold Spectraflame seem to suffer from oxidation issues more than cars that have darker colors. I'm going to assume this is due to less paint required to achieve a yellow or gold compared to a darker color which needs more paint. I could be wrong, but the lighter color cars do seem to have more oxidation issues even when the car's been well cared for. Anyway, just an observation. What you're looking at now is the car body after electropolishing. Yes, it's still copper plating the cars minus the hood, but it still works to remove all the oxidation and lightly polish the metal. I've got this all figured out now and may use it in the future to copper plate some cars. Next I'll go over the entire car with some 4/0 steel wool to further polish the body and to be sure that all the oxidation has been removed. Here you can see what everything looked like after I was done polishing. After this I'll wash the car in some soap and degreaser to be sure that all the oils are removed and then zinc plate the body. This will cover up the copper and any darker areas in the metal that are impossible to remove any other way. I usually plate a car twice, both times at 0.6 volts and 100 milliamps for 15 minutes. After the first plating, I'll remove the car and then go over it with some 4/0 steel wool to polish the zinc and to even out all the zinc crystals. This is important because if you try to plate the car all at once, it would come out with a sandpaper-like feel to the surface. This is due to the zinc crystals forming on the surface, and once these crystals get going, they increase the car's surface area and hog up the plating process. So at some point you're not really plating the car anymore, but just making bigger zinc crystals. This might be slightly useful in filling in very small pits, but the amount of work to remove them always outweighs the benefit. If you want to fill in pits through plating, you should take a look at using copper, as it's more conducive for being used for this. So here's what the car looked like after I went over it with some steel wool to polish the zinc. You can see that the pitting is quite a bit more noticeable now. Of course you're extremely zoomed in, so all issues are noticeable at this magnification. Given how much pitting this car has, I am going to paint it in a darker color to cover up the smaller pits. I chose to go with a dark blue color in this case. It took about 4 coats to reach the deep blue that I desired. The darker colors can't remove all the pitting issues, but they will dull them down considerably. Compare the painted body to the metallic one you saw earlier. Again, it doesn't remove all the pitting issues, but does a reasonable job of covering up the smaller ones. I'll discuss why I go this route over sanding them later in the video, but for now I'll consider the body done. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the base. Here the oxidation is not all that bad. The taillights and the grille still have a little bit of paint on them, and I can remove that paint with a small amount of paint remover and a Q-tip. After that, I'll dip the base into my electropolisher to remove the oxidation. After I wash the base off and go over it with some steel wool, I get to this. Normally I would zinc plate, but the base looks fine as it is, and adding zinc won't really improve upon it. So now it's time to address the rear suspension issue. Originally I'd planned on some crazy complex idea about 3D printing the plastic part and reinstalling the entire assembly. Luckily I came to my senses and realized I could just put a piece of 1/16 inch brass pipe in to hold the axle and wheels and use the plastic to align the tube and hold it while the superglue sets up. I'll lose any suspension in the back, but that's not really that big of a deal as I don't plan to send this car down any tracks anyway. It'll just be sitting in my display case. By the way, I've been using this StarrBond glue for some time now and have really come to love it, especially the accelerator they sell for it. It's almost instantaneous. If you need some really good superglue and want to help support the channel, I'll leave an affiliate link below. Unfortunately, the original axle is useless, both because it is bent out of shape and because it has a diameter too small for the pipe. So I'll cut it in half to remove the wheels. These are the cap style wheels, and I need to re-drill the holes to accept a modern axle, because a modern axle has a diameter that fits the inside diameter of the pipe. There are a lot of ways to do this. Probably the most common is to use a pin vise, but lately I've been using this mini chuck that goes on the end of my Dremel and can hold standard sized tools or really small drill bits like I'm using here. You can buy this chuck at most hardware stores that sell Dremel accessories. To use it, I set my Dremel to the lowest speed setting and then plunge it into the plastic wheel. And just like that, I have enlarged the hole to accept the modern axle. Now I just need to glue the axles into the pipe. This can be a bit tricky as I need to allow for a small gap between the wheel and the base and need to set this gap before the glue goes off. I've done enough of these at this point that I can get away with superglue, but if you wish to give yourself more time to get everything just right, then use something like a 7-minute epoxy. Once all the glue has fully set up, I can go about putting all the new reproduction wheel caps on. This is simply done by popping them in place. If I did everything correctly, then the car base should roll without any issues. Next, I'll take a look at the windshield. This one is in really good shape with only a few very small scratches. To remove these, I'll just polish them out with some plastic polish and a microfiber cloth. This is the result when I was done. Nice and shiny. Here's the interior plastic. Some asked for me to show this, so here it is. There's nothing wrong with it outside of needing a good cleaning. So the last thing I need to do is add on any accents. Here I'm painting the grille black using some black primer and an airbrush. This is the American version of this car. As such, the entire grille and headlights are painted black. The Hong Kong version had a black grille and didn't paint in the headlights, even though both cars had identical grilles and headlights. I find the Hong Kong version to look a bit strange, but it's an easy way to tell which is which. Another way to tell is the Hong Kong version has a much thinner white stripe on the roof compared to the US version. Anyway, once the paint is dry, I can start putting the car back together. The astute viewer has probably noticed that the car is missing some rather important details. 1, the wing in the back, and 2, the white stripe I just mentioned. Well, the wing is on order and has not come in yet. I didn't want to put this video off for another week while I wait for it to arrive. Plus, I'm not a big fan of the wing in the first place. It's just an ugly chunk of black plastic that inserts into the back of the windshield. The stripe, on the other hand, I do plan to put on, but in a different upcoming video, so you'll see this car again in the future. Let's talk a little bit about the subject of sanding. I think I've brought this up before, so if you don't want to hear it again, then feel free to mute me. I might be doing a video dedicated to this subject in the future, but I'll give you the quick and dirty of it now. When I do a video where I don't sand on a car, I tend to get people asking why I didn't sand it, because it would look better without the pits. And when I do a video on a car that I sand, I get comments that I ruined it. Let me say up front that there's not really a right and wrong to any of this. It really depends on which end result you desire. Over the years of restoring cars, I originally was in the sanding camp, but have sort of moved over to the don't sand camp. The reason is that it's very difficult to sand a car and end up with a car that looks original, as in restored. Most collectors want nothing to do with these cars and can easily pick them out of a group of original cars. On the other hand, sanding a car typically ends up with a car that is much more aesthetically pleasing, especially to the general public, than a car that is not sanded. You might be seeing where the conflict starts to arise. The general public or non-collectors want to see a perfect car, while a collector only sees you destroying a part of history. So therein lies the rub. I consider myself a collector and desire a restored car that is hard to distinguish from a non-restored mint version. But I also have a YouTube channel that is made up of people that for the most part do not consider themselves collectors and want to see a clean and polished car at the end of the video. The only way I see to deal with this is to not sand the cars that I really care about, like this one, and then sand and polish the ones that are not as important and are easier to obtain. This way the collector is not watching history being destroyed so much, and the general public still gets a polished car from time to time. But hey, let me know what you think below. I very much realize I can't please everyone, but it's always fun to try. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.